The stars stretched out in every direction, an endless sea of shimmering points of light as the crew of the Eclipse navigated through the dense nebula that had long been ignored by galactic cartographers. Most of the crew had spent the last few months dealing with mundane exploration tasks, cataloging minerals, and scanning moons for signs of habitability. But today, something was different, something no one had expected. Captain Leela Storm sat in the command chair, eyes glued to the holographic readout before her. Her fingers danced over the controls, running scans on a previously unexplored planet at the edge of the nebula. A rocky world, lifeless and barren on the surface. Yet, as the sensors probed deeper into the planet's crust, an anomaly appeared, a signal, strange, faint, and ancient, but unmistakably artificial. "Commander Duran," Captain Storm called out, turning to her second-in-command. "You see this?" Lieutenant Commander Elias Duran, tall and lean, peered over her shoulder at the readout. His expression grew serious as the signal grew clearer, pulsing in rhythm, as if beckoning them to investigate further. "It's a distress call," he said, his voice edged with disbelief. "A human distress signal. But it's old. Very old." Storm's heart raced. The Eclipse was an exploration vessel, not a warship, and they had seen their share of mysterious finds. But this was different. From where? Duran tapped at the console, and the coordinates flared up in red. "This planet. It's from here." The planet's name flashed briefly. Gornath IV. It was a world marked in the galactic archives as uninhabited, with no significant resources or records of human presence. Yet the signal persisted, echoing across the vast distance of space, somehow surviving the ravages of time and entropy. "Plot a course," Captain Storm ordered. "We need to investigate." Hours later, the Eclipse entered the atmosphere of Gornath IV, its sleek hull cutting through the thick clouds that enveloped the world. A sense of eerie silence filled the ship as the crew prepared for the landing. Captain Storm stood in the command center, her brow furrowed, staring at the readouts as the ship descended toward the planet's surface. "Approaching landing site," Duran reported, voice tense. "We'd found the source of the signal. Looks like some kind of structure, maybe an old research facility or—" Before he could finish, the ship's sensors erupted in a flurry of warnings, blinking lights and distorted readings flashing across every console. "What the hell?" Storm muttered, gripping the armrests of her chair as the controls went haywire. The Eclipse bucked violently, sending crew members scrambling to hold onto their stations. The ship's AI struggled to maintain balance, but the interference was overwhelming. "Hold on," Duran barked, his voice cutting through the chaos. The shaking ceased almost as suddenly as it had started. The Eclipse landed with a thud, the ground below stabilizing, as the crew let out a collective sigh of relief. But the silence outside the ship was unsettling, as if the planet itself was holding its breath. Storm stood, her face hardening with determination. "Get the landing team ready. I want answers." Minutes later, the airlock doors opened, and the crew disembarked onto the desolate world. They were greeted by the same barren landscape they had seen from orbit, rocky plains stretching out in every direction, broken only by jagged cliffs and twisted, ancient trees. Yet, in the distance, something else caught their eye. A massive structure loomed on the horizon, half buried in the sands and debris. It was unlike anything the crew had ever seen, human in origin, yet alien in design. Massive metal spires pierced the sky, their surfaces etched with symbols and patterns that defied comprehension. "I've never seen anything like this," Duran muttered, staring at the monolithic structure. "This isn't just old. It's ancient, human-made, but far beyond anything we've encountered in our time." Storm felt a chill creep up her spine. The signal was coming from within that structure, pulling her toward it like a magnet. She couldn't shake the feeling that something had been waiting here for a very long time. As the team approached, they entered a vast chamber, its walls covered in strange alien markings and remnants of technology that seemed to hum with dormant power. The signal, now louder and clearer than ever, emanated from a strange console embedded deep in the center of the chamber. It glowed with a faint, ghostly light. "Captain," one of the engineers called out, his voice crackling through the comms. "You need to see this." Storm walked toward the console, the air thick with anticipation. As her fingers brushed against the controls, the display flickered to life, showing a series of complex patterns, maps, coordinates, and schematics. And at the center, one word repeated over and over: Terran. Suddenly, the room grew colder. The air seemed to grow dense with history, as if the planet itself was coming to life after centuries of silence. Storm's heart raced. This wasn't just a forgotten piece of humanity's past. This was something far bigger, something ancient. A deep voice, as old as the stars themselves, whispered through the ship's comms. "The Empire has not fallen." The crew froze, their breath caught in their throats. The voice was unmistakably human. But who, or what, had been waiting here all these years? The mysteries of the Terran Empire were far from over. The eerie voice still lingered in the air, as if the planet itself had breathed life into the words. Captain Leela Storm stood frozen before the flickering console, her pulse racing as she processed the meaning of what she had just heard. The Empire has not fallen. The words felt like a call to arms, a summons from the past, a past no one, not even the most knowledgeable scholars, had expected to resurface. The remnants of an empire thought lost to time. What the hell was that? Duran's voice cracked through the static of the comms, breaking the silence. Storm took a deep breath, pushing away the creeping sense of dread that had settled over her. She reached out, placing her hand firmly on the console. "I don't know, but I intend to find out. Power up the ship. We need to get back to the Eclipse now." The team moved quickly, the atmosphere thick with unspoken tension, as they retraced their steps through the ancient structure. Each of them was aware of the gravity of the situation. No longer were they simply exploring uncharted space. They had stumbled upon something far more dangerous. Whatever had waited for centuries beneath the surface of Gorneth IV was now awake, and it was clear that humanity's past was far from gone. As the crew boarded the Eclipse, Storm turned to face her officers. "Duran, prepare a full analysis of the signal. I want to know exactly where it's coming from, and what it means. We need to report back to Earth immediately." Hours later, the Eclipse was back in orbit, its hull shining against the deep black of space. The crew worked tirelessly, processing the data from Gorneth IV, trying to piece together what they had uncovered. Duran's team had managed to decode part of the signal, which seemed to be a complex map of star systems, leading toward a distant, uncharted region of space. The signal had originated from a planet, an unknown world near the galactic core. "Captain," Duran called out from the bridge, "I found something. The map leads to a system that matches no known records. There's a star, Exerithus, with a planet on the outer rim. It's not on any star chart, but based on the signal's trajectory, it's where we're headed." Storm leaned over Duran's shoulder, studying the glowing star map. "That's where the signal's pointing." "That's where it's strongest," Duran confirmed. "It's not just a signal. It's a beacon." Leela's heart raced again. The thought of another ancient human presence so far from Earth seemed impossible. How had no one found this before? "Plot a course for Exerithus," she ordered, her voice firm. "We need to investigate. Whatever is left there might be the key to understanding what happened to the Terran Empire." As the Eclipse made its way toward Cerethus, the crew remained on high alert. The mission had grown far more complicated than any of them had anticipated. This wasn't simply an archaeological discovery, it was an invitation. An invitation from a civilization that had once ruled the stars and had somehow vanished from history. 2 days later, they arrived at the Exerithus system. The planet they were searching for was orbiting the outer reaches of the system, a cold, lifeless world. As the Eclipse dropped out of warp speed, Storm stood at the helm, her eyes narrowing as the planet's surface appeared on the view screen. "This is it," she said quietly. Set us down on the surface. Let's find out what's really going on here." Landing was smoother than Storm had anticipated. The barren planet was eerily quiet, its surface covered in frozen tundra and jagged mountain ranges. But as they made their way to the site pinpointed by the signal, they came upon something unexpected. A small, heavily fortified outpost, hidden deep within a valley. It wasn't just an ancient structure, it was active. The lights flickered on, and the unmistakable hum of life support systems buzzed in the air. The outpost was not abandoned. It had been maintained. "We're not alone," Duran said, a note of tension in his voice. Storm nodded, her instincts kicking into overdrive. Something was very wrong here. "Prepare for a full sweep. I want to know who, or what, is running this place." As the team made their way inside the outpost, the walls seemed to pulse with a strange energy. The place was pristine, far more advanced than anything they had seen on Gorneth IV. The technology was unmistakably human, yet it bore the hallmarks of a civilization far beyond their own. Giant screens flickered to life, revealing complex data streams. At the center of it all was a massive console, older than anything the crew had encountered. "It's a control center," one of the engineers said, her voice low in awe. "But for what?" The console hummed to life as they approached, and a new voice echoed through the room. Cold, mechanical, yet unmistakably human. "This is the Terran remnant," the voice declared, awaiting activation. "All systems are operational. The Empire rises again." Storm's blood ran cold as she realized the truth. The Terran Empire hadn't just survived. It had been waiting, biding its time, hidden in the shadows. The remnant was real. And now, it was ready to rise again. "Get us out of here," Storm ordered, her voice steely. "This isn't just an archaeological site. This is a military stronghold, and we've just triggered something far bigger than we can handle." But as the crew began to make their way back to the ship, a dark realization settled over them. The Terran remnant wasn't just a hidden faction. It was an empire in exile, waiting for the moment to reclaim what was lost. And that moment had arrived. The eclipse lifted off from the surface of Cerethus, the sleek starship slicing through the planet's atmosphere as its engines hummed with power. Inside the ship, the crew was on edge. They had uncovered something far more dangerous than they had anticipated. An entire faction of humanity that had remained hidden, waiting for the perfect moment to rise again. But as Captain Leela Storm stared out at the cold expanse of space, she knew that their discovery had not gone unnoticed. "Captain," Duran said, his voice tight with urgency, "we're not alone anymore." Storm turned sharply, her eyes narrowing at the tactical readouts on the screen. On the far side of the system, two warships appeared out of the void, their massive hulls sleek and black, almost camouflaged in the darkness of space. The ships were not human. Their design was angular and sharp, unlike anything in the Terran arsenal. The sensors blinked red with warning. "Aetherian ships," Duran said, the words bitter on his tongue. The Aetherians were a powerful alien race, known for their ruthlessness and aggressive expansionism. They had been a threat to humanity for centuries, engaging in wars of conquest that had nearly wiped out smaller species in their wake. The Terran Empire had once held them at bay, but after the Empire's fall, the Aetherians had moved freely through the galaxy, conquering system after system. Now, they were here. "They've been tracking us since we left Gorneth IV," Storm said, her voice steady despite the shock of the revelation. "They must have known about the signal. They're here for the same reason we are." "Should we engage?" Duran asked, already prepping the ship's weapon systems. "No," Storm said quickly, her hand raised. "Not yet. We need to figure out what they're after. We can't afford to make enemies just yet, not without knowing how to fight back." The two Aetherian ships moved in slowly, their presence a looming threat in the emptiness of space. The Aetherians didn't speak over the comms, as humans did. Instead, They used an ancient, almost primal form of communication. Deep, resonant pulses that vibrated through the airwaves. The crew of the Eclipse watched, waiting for some sort of response. But none came. Storm's mind raced. The Terran remnant's sudden resurgence could provoke all sorts of reactions from the galaxy. But the Aetherians, they wouldn't tolerate any power that might rival their own. The signal they had uncovered on Tirithis had no doubt drawn their attention. But it was more than that. They had felt it. The resurgence of the Terran Empire was something that could threaten their long-held dominance in the galaxy. "This is a power struggle," Storm murmured, half to herself. "They're here to crush us before we can build strength." Her fingers danced over the controls as the sensors beeped again, this time with a warning from the ship's external communications. A sharp, garbled voice broke through the static, a voice unlike any they had heard before. "This is Etherian Command. Human vessel, you have trespassed into Etherian-controlled space. Stand down and prepare for termination." Storm's blood ran cold at the cold, commanding tone of the Etherian leader. She could hear the arrogance in the words. They were used to taking what they wanted without challenge. "We have no intention of fighting unless provoked," Storm responded, trying to maintain a calm, authoritative tone. "We're just passing through. We're not here for conquest." The silence that followed was pregnant with threat, but the Aetherian ships didn't immediately attack. The pulse of communication continued, rhythmic and intimidating, as though the Aetherians were considering their next move. "The Terran Empire is dead," came the reply. "You are relics, lost remnants of a broken species. Your resurrection will not be tolerated." Storm's pulse quickened. The Aetherians knew more than they should have. Whoever or whatever had been monitoring the Terran remnant, they had left traces of their existence. And now, they were drawing the line. The Terran Empire had once been their greatest rival, and the mere thought of humans rising from the ashes again was intolerable to them. "They're not going to let us leave," Duran said, his tone cold and resolved. "They'll want to eliminate us before we can grow stronger. And if they know about the remnant." Storm didn't need to hear more. The Terran remnant was a weapon, an unknown power that could turn the tide in galactic politics, and the Aetherians couldn't allow it. They had to act fast, before they were discovered as a serious threat. "Get us out of here, Duran," she ordered. "But stay alert. We're going to have to move quickly to stay ahead of them. If they think we're weak, they'll take their chances." With a few swift commands, the Eclipse powered up its engines, and the ship shot forward into the cold vastness of space, its course set for the outer reaches of the system. The Aetherians, still trailing them, fired a warning shot across their bow, a burst of energy that shook the ship but didn't cause significant damage. "Damn it," Duran muttered. "They're not giving up." Storm's fingers flew over the controls. She activated the cloaking device, masking the Eclipse from the Aetherian sensors. The ship's engines powered down to a low hum as they coasted silently through the shadows, hoping the Aetherians would lose their trail. "We're not safe yet," Storm said, her voice low. "But we have a window. We need to find out everything we can about the Terran remnant. And fast. The Aetherians won't give up. If we can find a way to outmaneuver them, we might stand a chance." The crew braced themselves, knowing that this was only the beginning. They weren't just caught between the past and the future. They were now playing a dangerous game of survival against the Aetherians, a race that would stop at nothing to prevent humanity from regaining its place in the galaxy. As the Eclipse drifted deeper into the unknown, they could only hope that their next move would be the one that ensured humanity's survival. The Eclipse drifted silently through the cold void of space, cloaked from the Aetherians' prying eyes. Captain Leela Storm stood at the helm, eyes fixed on the shimmering stars ahead. The hum of the ship's engines was almost a comfort, though she knew the fleeting silence could not last. The Aetherians were still tracking them, and with every moment that passed, the tension among the crew grew heavier. "Captain," Duran called from the tactical station, his voice tight with concern. "We've reached the coordinates. The Terran remnant facility is right ahead. Storm exhaled sharply. They had barely escaped the Ethrians, and now they were on the cusp of uncovering the true depth of the Terran Empire's hidden legacy. The location they had reached was another uncharted planet, one of many the signal had led them to. This world had been marked as a dead zone, its resources depleted and its space traffic non-existent. But as the eclipse dropped out of its cloaked mode and approached the planet's surface, the landscape below told a different story. A sprawling city, half-ruined but still standing tall, covered the planet's surface. Enormous skyscrapers and gigantic domes of ancient architecture loomed like ghosts of a forgotten civilization. Some of the structures were crumbling, but many were intact, their surfaces glowing faintly with an energy that hadn't seen the light of day for centuries. From orbit, it looked like a city waiting for its people to return. Turan's voice broke the silence again. "Captain, this is far beyond anything we saw on Serethis. There's something here, technology, structures that shouldn't exist in a dead zone." Storm didn't need to hear more. The whispers of the Terran Empire were growing louder, and whatever lay hidden on this planet would undoubtedly hold the answers they sought. But the Aetherians wouldn't be far behind. They knew about the signal, and by now, they would have figured out that something far more dangerous than the eclipse had been triggered. It wouldn't be long before they descended on the planet, weapons at the ready. "We need to move fast," Storm said, her voice resolute. "Prepare a landing team. We'll head down to that city and search for any signs of life or information on what's been happening here. But keep an eye on the sky. The Etherians are still out there." Minutes later, the eclipse touched down on the planet's surface, its landing gear sinking into the dust of an ancient street. The crew, suited in their tactical armor, disembarked swiftly, weapons at the ready. The city, though eerily quiet, exuded a strange sense of grandeur, as though the place had been built for a purpose far beyond any ordinary civilization. Towering spires surrounded them, their surfaces covered in cryptic symbols that pulsed with energy. Storm led the way, her boots clicking against the pavement as she took in the imposing structures. The silence was unsettling, and the weight of history seemed to press down on them with every step. It was clear now. They were no longer just explorers. They were trespassers in a city that belonged to a long-dead empire, and they were about to learn whether anything from the past still lived within its walls. They moved deeper into the city, passing through a wide, empty square lined with statues of warriors and rulers from an era long gone. The further they traveled, the more the remnants of advanced technology became apparent. Doors that opened without touch, hovering platforms that glided silently above the ground, and towering holographic screens filled with unreadable data. One of the engineers, Lieutenant Garrison, scanned the area. "There's a central hub ahead. Looks like a command center of sorts." Storm nodded and signaled to the crew to move forward. The closer they got to the center, the stronger the hum of power became. They passed through a massive archway into a chamber that could have fit the entire eclipse inside. The walls were covered in intricate carvings, artwork, and blueprints of machines and weapons, a record of the Empire's greatest achievements and darkest secrets. At the center of the room was a console, glowing faintly with a dim light. The air around it felt thick, charged with ancient energy. As Storm stepped closer, the console sprang to life, displaying a holographic projection of a vast star system. A map, a chart of human expansion during the height of the Terran Empire. The map was enormous, and it covered vast territories that Storm had never heard of, star systems that no one had dared to explore. The Empire had reached far beyond the core systems, stretching to the far edges of the galaxy. And then, as Storm studied the map more closely, something even more disturbing became apparent. The Terran Empire wasn't dead. Not entirely. There, nestled within the farthest reaches of the galaxy, was a glowing sector, a black hole surrounded by energy storms. The map labeled it the heart of the Empire. It was a place long forgotten, its coordinates hidden for a reason. a place that could explain the true reason for the Terran Empire's downfall. "What is this?" Storm whispered, unable to tear her eyes away from the projection. Duran stepped forward, studying the map with her. "This is the source of the signal. It's where everything started. The Terran remnant. This was their last stronghold." A low rumble echoed through the city, a vibration that seemed to come from deep within the planet itself. The ground shook beneath their feet, and a sound like distant thunder reverberated through the air. "We're not alone," Garrison said, his hand tight around his weapon. Storm's heart pounded. The Aetherians had found them again. The signal, the ancient power, the hidden empire, it had all led to this moment. "We need to leave," Storm ordered, her voice steady but urgent. "We've triggered something, and I don't think we're going to get out of here quietly." As the crew rushed toward the exit, the walls of the ancient command center flickered with life, the holograms of the past reaching out, as though warning them, the past had not forgotten them. The Terran Empire was waking up, and it was angry. The Eclipse's engines roared to life as the crew scrambled to board the ship, their every movement urgent, adrenaline surging through their veins. The rumbling beneath their feet had escalated into a full-scale tremor, and as Captain Leela Storm sprinted across the ruined city's streets, the distant thunder now sounded unmistakably like something much more dangerous, something that was waking up. "We don't have much time," Duran shouted as he reached the docking bay, his voice barely audible over the deafening noise reverberating through the planet's surface. "The seismic readings are off the charts. Whatever's down there, it's activating." Storm pushed forward, eyes scanning the skies for any sign of the Aetherians. The darkened atmosphere shimmered with strange energy, and a cold wind swept through the streets, carrying the scent of something ancient and long forgotten. She could feel it in the air. This was no ordinary tremor. Whatever had been hidden beneath the planet was stirring. They boarded the Eclipse with seconds to spare. The ship's hull groaned as it lifted off, tearing through the atmosphere. But Storm didn't look back. She couldn't. The fate of the crew depended on staying ahead of whatever force had been unleashed on the surface. The view screen ahead revealed the desolate ruins of the city as they ascended, the fading echoes of destruction reverberating across the barren landscape. And then, with a sudden jolt, the Eclipse lurched violently. A massive shockwave slammed into the ship, knocking the crew off balance. The ship's systems flared as alarms blared. "Shields at 60%, Captain," Duran barked, eyes wide with disbelief. "Something just hit us." It came from the surface. Storm's pulse quickened as she grabbed the nearest console, quickly scanning the data. On the surface, a colossal structure was emerging from the planet's core, a black tower of unimaginable size, its jagged silhouette cutting through the clouds, reaching toward the sky like the hand of some long-forgotten god. As the tower rose, the seismic activity intensified, sending shockwaves rippling through the planet and shaking the ship once again. "This is no ordinary structure," Duran said, his voice laced with awe. It's moving like it's alive." "A living weapon," Storm muttered under her breath. The realization hit her like a sledgehammer. This was no ancient relic or buried technology. This was the last weapon of the Terran Empire, and it was awakening after centuries of dormancy. The remnant had been waiting for the right moment, and now it was time to rise. The Eclipse broke through the atmosphere, but the massive tower on the surface seemed to sense their escape. The skies erupted with energy as bright tendrils of lightning shot out from the tower, cracking across space and slamming into the Eclipse's shields. The ship shuddered violently under the impact. "Captain, we can't take another hit like that," Duran warned, panic creeping into his voice. "We're being targeted." Storm's mind raced. The Aetherians were closing in, their ships now visible in the distance, their weapons primed and ready. But the threat from the planet itself was more immediate. Whatever was in that tower had seen them, and it was far more dangerous than the Aetherians could ever be. If the Terran remnant's weapon was truly awakened, They had no idea what they were up against. "Engage the warp drive, now," Storm ordered, her voice sharp and decisive. The crew scrambled to initiate the jump, but just as the warp coils hummed to life, the ship was rocked by another violent jolt. A final energy blast, far stronger than any previous strike, slammed into the Eclipse with devastating force. The ship's hull groaned under the pressure, and the warning lights flashed as the damage reports began flooding in. "We're not going to make it," one of the engineers shouted, panic clear in their voice. Storm gritted her teeth, slamming her fist down on the console. "No, we're not losing this ship. Get us out of here, now." The ship lurched again, and then, with a brilliant flash of light, the Eclipse's warp drive surged forward. The stars blurred around them as the ship shot into the depths of space, narrowly escaping the gravitational pull of the planet and its now activated weapon. The tower below receded into the distance, its massive silhouette still visible in the rearview as they jumped into the safety of deep space. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. The shaking of the ship subsided, and the crew exhaled in relief. They had escaped, but only just. Storm collapsed into her chair, her hand trembling as she wiped sweat from her brow. They had barely made it out alive. The power that had been unleashed on the surface of the planet was far beyond anything they could have imagined. It was clear now. The Terran Empire's last weapon had risen, and it was not just a relic. It was a force capable of changing the entire balance of power in the galaxy. But as the Eclipse drifted into the cold expanse of space, Storm knew that their escape was only temporary. The Atherians would not let this go. They had already seen the potential threat of the Remnant, and if the Terran Empire's weapon was as powerful as it seemed, it wouldn't just be the Atherians they would have to fight. The galaxy was on the brink of war, and humanity, both the Remnant and the Terran descendants, was caught in the middle. "We need to regroup," Storm said, her voice grim. "We can't face this alone." Duran nodded, his gaze fixed on the stars ahead. The Remnant may have returned, but so have their enemies. We're not out of the woods yet. And in the quiet of deep space, the Eclipse drifted onward, the crew knowing full well that their journey was only beginning. The Eclipse hung in the dark void of space, far from the crumbling ruins of Echo City, its crew now in the midst of a frantic scramble to make sense of the chaos they had just escaped. Captain Leela Storm stood at the helm, her fingers hovering over the controls, but her mind was miles away, lost in the terrifying revelation of what lay beneath that long-dead planet. The Terran Empire's last weapon had awoken, the weapon that could reshape the galaxy. Storm took a slow breath, trying to center herself, but the weight of the situation pressed down on her shoulders. The Atherians weren't far behind, and she knew they were no strangers to pursuing a target with brutal efficiency. The Remnant's ancient weapon had stirred a hornet's nest, and now they were being hunted, not just by the Atherians, but by the unknown power of the past. "Captain," Duran said, his voice tight with tension, breaking her thoughts. He stood near the communications console, his eyes glued to the screens. "We're receiving a transmission." "From who?" Storm asked, not needing to look up to know the answer. The Atherians had been tracking them since their escape, and it was only a matter of time before they reached out. "Atherian Command," Duran replied, his face hardening. The comms system buzzed to life, and a cold, harsh voice filled the air. "Human vessel, this is Atherian High Command. You are in violation of Atherian sovereignty. Surrender immediately or face annihilation." Storm's heart skipped a beat. The Atherians had been ruthless in their conquest of the galaxy, and they were not in the habit of negotiating. Their entire empire had been built on fear, dominance, and the swift elimination of threats. But this time, the threat was more complicated than a simple military skirmish. "I think they're aware we've triggered something," Duran muttered, eyes scanning the readout of their current position. "And they're not happy about it." The voice on the other end of the transmission continued, sharper now. "We are aware of your interference with the Terran Remnant signal. The consequences of this action will be severe. You will surrender, or we will ensure that this threat is neutralized." Storm clenched her fists. The Etherians had always underestimated humanity, but this wasn't just any threat. It was the last remnants of the Terran Empire, a force that even the Etherians hadn't fully understood. The weapon they had awoken was too powerful for any one faction to control. "We can't give in to them," Storm said, her voice steady. "We need to find a way to turn the tables before they wipe us out. We can't afford to lose the advantage we have." Duran nodded, though his gaze was filled with doubt. "The Aetherians have a fleet. They're not like the raiders or pirates we've dealt with before. They'll be relentless." "I know," Storm replied. "But we have one thing they don't: the Terran Empire's legacy. The weapon we woke up is more than just a relic. It's power beyond anything they've seen." The crew stood in silence, the reality of their situation setting in. The Etherians were already mobilizing, and time was running out. Storm glanced over at the map displayed on the screen, the coordinates of the heart of the Empire, the glowing sector marked on the ancient star chart they'd uncovered. If they could reach that place, they might be able to unlock the full potential of the Terran remnant and gain the upper hand. But could they reach it before the Aetherians destroyed them? And more importantly, would they be able to control what they had awakened? The communication screen flickered once more, the Aetherian commander's voice cutting through the tension like a knife. "You have been given your final warning, human. We will not let your species stand in our way again. Surrender or prepare for your extinction." Storm's gaze hardened. She had fought too long and too hard to let humanity be extinguished. The Etherians had underestimated the human spirit before, and she wasn't about to let them make the same mistake again. The remnant might be their only hope, but it was a dangerous gamble. And right now, the stakes couldn't be higher. "Get us to the heart of the Empire," Storm ordered, her voice cutting through the tension like steel. "We need to get there before the Aetherians do. Set course immediately and prepare for whatever comes next." The crew scrambled to obey, but a sense of unease lingered in the air. The Etherians were closing in, and the weapon they had awakened was a mystery. But they had no choice. The remnants of the Terran Empire were humanity's last hope. If they could unlock its secrets, they might stand a chance. As the eclipse accelerated into deep space, the stars stretching before them, Storm looked out of the viewport. The galaxy stretched on, vast and cold, but for the first time in years, she felt the weight of history behind her. Humanity had faced extinction before, and they had survived. Now, it was time to rise again. Back on the Etherian flagship, High Command was already preparing for the final phase of their assault. The Etherian leader stood on the bridge, watching the readings as the human vessel fled toward the heart of the Empire. "Do not let them reach that place," the commander ordered coldly. "We cannot allow the remnants of the Terran Empire to return. Activate the fleet. Prepare to engage." The hunt was on, and neither side knew who would emerge victorious. The eclipse streaked through the vast expanse of space, heading straight toward the heart of the Empire, the distant, glowing sector that held the secret to humanity's survival. Captain Leela Storm stood at the command console, her hands steady on the controls despite the urgency that raced through her veins. Behind her, the crew worked in a synchronized frenzy, each member acutely aware of the stakes. The Aetherians were on their trail, and their fleet was closing in fast. "We're nearly there," Duran said, his voice taut with tension as he monitored the ship's systems. "But I'm picking up strange readings. Energy fluctuations. Something's wrong." Storm didn't have to look at him to know what he meant. The closer they got to the heart of the Empire, the stranger the phenomena around them became. The energy storms in the sector had intensified, and the very fabric of space seemed to distort as they approached the coordinates marked on the ancient Terran map. But the signal, weak and intermittent at first, was becoming stronger, almost as if it were guiding them toward something specific, something buried beneath the chaos of the energy storms. "We have to push through," Storm said, her jaw clenched. "We can't turn back now." The crew tightened their grips on their stations as the Eclipse dove deeper into the tumultuous sector. Suddenly, a warning alarm blared, and the ship lurched violently. A massive shockwave surged through space, throwing the crew off balance. "Captain," shouted Lieutenant Garrison, gripping a console for stability. "We've been hit by a gravitational wave. Our shields are failing." The Eclipse groaned, its hull vibrating under the pressure of the energy storms. Storm gritted her teeth, heart pounding in her chest. They were nearing the epicenter of the heart of the Empire, and something was waiting for them. A force older than the galaxy itself. "We have no choice," Storm said, her voice unwavering. "Full power to the engines. Hold tight. We're going in." The ship surged forward, cutting through the swirling cosmic storm. A strange, magnetic pull tugged at the Eclipse as it neared the heart of the sector. The stars ahead began to warp and twist, like fluid caught in the current of a vast ocean. There was something unnatural about the way the space around them bent, as though the very laws of physics were being rewritten. Suddenly, the distortion intensified. The Eclipse lurched once more, the force of the wave throwing everyone to the floor. The crew scrambled to regain control, but the ship was spiraling out of control, its course dictated by the invisible hand of the energy storm. "Captain, we're not going to make it," Duran shouted, his voice tinged with panic. "The gravity wells are pulling us in." But before anyone could react, the ship's systems clicked back into place. The distortion vanished as quickly as it had appeared, and the Eclipse broke free from the cosmic grip. Ahead of them was an enormous structure, more massive than anything they had ever encountered. A ring-shaped anomaly, surrounded by a halo of swirling cosmic energy, hovered in the center of the storm. It's a gateway," Garrison murmured, awe filling his voice as he stared at the structure. "A gateway to another dimension, or another time." The heart of the Empire was not just a star system, not just a sector of space. It was a focal point of the galaxy's ancient history, a point of convergence for powers beyond mortal comprehension. And as the Eclipse drew closer, it became apparent that this was no ordinary relic. It was alive. The gateway pulsed with energy, its surface shifting in patterns that seemed to defy logic. "We have to enter it," Storm said, her voice firm. "This is it. Whatever lies beyond that gateway is humanity's future." The Eclipse's engines roared as it pushed forward, entering the magnetic field of the gateway. The crew watched in stunned silence as the ship passed through the threshold, into the unknown. Inside the gateway, everything changed. The Eclipse's instruments flickered and died, the holographic readouts distorting beyond recognition. The stars themselves vanished from view, replaced by a dark, endless void filled with strange energy patterns. There was no up or down, no forward or backward, just an infinite expanse of swirling chaos. "This is impossible," Duran muttered, his eyes wide as he stared out of the viewport. "We're not in normal space anymore. This is something beyond comprehension." Storm clenched her fists, her mind racing. They had crossed into another dimension, a place where the very fabric of space and time was distorted. But this was no random phenomenon. It was the heart of the Terran Empire's final secret, a place where their ancestors had hidden their greatest weapon. A hum filled the ship's hull, a low, resonant sound that seemed to echo from all directions. The crew exchanged nervous glances, but Storm didn't flinch. She had come this far, and she wasn't about to back down now. Suddenly, a voice echoed through the ship, booming from the walls themselves. It was ancient, familiar, yet utterly alien. "You have come seeking the legacy of the Terran Empire," the voice said, its tone both inviting and foreboding. "You are not the first to seek it. Many have failed. Will you succeed where others have fallen?" Storm's heart raced. She stepped forward, addressing the voice with quiet determination. "We are humanity. We don't fail. We rise." The voice paused, as if contemplating her words. Then it responded, its tone shifting. "Then prove it." The ship shook violently as a vast, ethereal presence stirred within the void. The eclipse lurched, and Storm knew they were about to face a test unlike anything they had ever encountered before. The gateway had opened. The legacy of the Terran Empire was within reach. But would humanity be strong enough to claim it? The eclipse trembled violently as the ethereal presence stirred, the hum inside the ship escalating into a deep, resonating roar that shook the very core of the vessel. The crew clung to their stations, bracing for whatever was about to happen. The voice that had spoken to them echoed in their minds, leaving an unsettling sense of foreboding. "Prove it," the voice had said. And now, as the walls of the ship reverberated with an otherworldly power, it felt as though the very fabric of reality was shifting around them. Captain Leela Storm stood at the helm, her knuckles white, as she gripped the control panel. "We've come too far to fail," she murmured under her breath. But even as the words left her lips, a chilling thought took root in her mind. What if they were too late? What if the legacy of the Terran Empire, the weapon they had uncovered, was too much for humanity to handle? "Captain." Turan's voice broke through her thoughts, panic clear in his tone. "Something's happening to the ship's systems. Power surging. Our shields are collapsing." Storm's eyes darted to the ship's diagnostics. The power grid was fluctuating wildly, every system in disarray. The eclipse was being pulled apart by the very energy surrounding them, and she had no way of knowing if the damage was irreversible. "We need to stabilize the systems, now." Storm barked, but before anyone could respond, a bright light exploded from the center of the void they were in, illuminating the ship's interior with an unnatural glow. It was as if the gateway itself was alive, its energies manifesting in physical form. And then, the reality around them shifted. The ship lurched, and the crew members were thrown off their feet, tumbling across the floor as a deep, thunderous roar reverberated through the very bones of the eclipse. When Storm managed to regain her bearings, she found herself staring at the massive, open expanse beyond the viewport. They were no longer in the void of distorted space. Instead, the eclipse was now surrounded by a vast, shattered city. Massive spires, their once glorious surfaces cracked and crumbled, rose out of a landscape that seemed to stretch endlessly. The stars above had disappeared, replaced by an ever-present, dimly glowing light that illuminated the decaying remnants of what could only be the Terran Empire's last stronghold. "This place. It's a graveyard," Duran whispered, his voice tinged with awe and dread. "The Empire's final resting place." Storm's stomach churned as she surveyed the ruins of what had once been a magnificent civilization. But the presence she felt, the same force that had reached into their minds through the ship, was still there, lurking in the background, waiting to test them. "Humanity." The voice returned, softer this time, but no less imposing. "You stand on the threshold of the Empire's greatest secret. What you seek lies beyond, but know this: to claim it, you must prove that you can wield the power of the Empire without succumbing to it. Fail, and your species will be lost to the galaxy's history, no different than the rest who sought to control it and failed." Storm's heart raced. This was the moment. The legacy of the Terran Empire was within their reach, but so was their destruction. The power that had once fueled the Empire's dominance was now a dangerous relic, and if they were to survive, they had to unlock it without falling victim to its weight. "Captain, the ship," Garrison said, his voice trembling. "The systems. They're adapting to the energy in the city. It's like the place is connected to the ship." Storm glanced at the display. The ship's diagnostic systems were shifting, realigning with the decaying infrastructure around them. It was as if the eclipse had become part of the city, a link between the present and the Empire's lost past. "To unlock the power you seek, you must prove your strength," the voice continued. "Prove that you will not be consumed by it. The trial begins now." The floor beneath the crew's feet rumbled, and from the depths of the shattered city below, massive structures began to rise. Ancient machines, long dormant, began to hum with energy, their colossal forms shifting into a complex pattern as if preparing for something. Storm stood tall, her mind focused. She had no idea what the trial would entail, but she had no choice but to face it. Humanity's future depended on it. This was their final test. The legacy of the Terran Empire had been waiting for a species worthy enough to control it. "We don't know what's coming," she said, her voice calm but resolute. "But we'll face it together. We've already proven that humanity will fight to the end. Now it's time to show them that we will rise." As if responding to her declaration, the massive machines in the city below shifted into motion, their enormous arms reaching upward and their lights flashing to life. The trial had begun. The Eclipse's engines roared to life as Storm pushed the ship forward, ready to meet the challenges that lay ahead. But as they ventured deeper into the ruins of the Terran Empire, a dark thought lingered at the back of her mind. The galaxy would never be the same after this. Whether humanity succeeded or failed, they were about to change everything. And so the Eclipse plunged forward into the heart of the Empire's legacy, ready to face the unknown.